Hello and welcome to this webinar brought to you by Public Technology and UiPath. I'm Sam Trendall. We're here today as part of our AI Week project, during which we're bringing you a range of content examining the many opportunities and challenges that are presented to the public sector by artificial intelligence, automation and robotics technologies. And I'm delighted to be joined for today's discussion by McGregor from UiPath and by Mathieu Webster from NHS Shared Business Services. I guess a good place to start would be, in a sense, right at the very beginning and what AI actually is. It's one of these terms, as we all know, that's bandied about an awful lot. It's used quite nebulously. It's used by a lot of people to mean a lot of different things, I suspect. Ian, how would you define AI? What are we talking about when we say AI?
AI is actually, I believe, a misnomer. AI is an umbrella term. You can't go and buy AI, it doesn't sit on a shelf. What it actually is a term for different technologies, smart technologies that solve different business problems. And examples of AI technologies would be machine learning, computer vision, NLP, predictive analytics, smart scanning. What they're all doing is solving individual business problems, helping a company, or an individual, an employee, a department be more efficient, more effective in a smarter way. What I would say though is, in order to get the benefit, maximum benefit out of AI tools, is you need to have a baseline, and the baseline needs to be optimized processes in the first place and automated as far as possible. Then when you add the intelligent technologies on top of that, the magnitude of the benefit is significant. So AI itself is just an umbrella term for different technologies that solve different problems. You can't go and buy it. It's different things, really.
Yeah, I think the reason why it's such a buzzword now is because we've got new ways of bringing together all these different tools. Robotic process automation's taking what were separate tools before and pulling them all together. So you can pull together the image recognition systems, the natural language processing, and when you pull those together and analyse them in one place, then you can really start to take advantage of all the data that's available to you.
Well, let's look at the way it's being deployed. Perhaps you mentioned it's being deployed in ways that are seen as at least both good and bad. Perhaps not looking at the bad, but looking at the challenges. How big are they and what are they? How do you experience those in your work at NHS SBS?
So I think there's been difficulty finding the right kind of use cases. You need to know where you can apply AI and what types of tools. And there's millions of tools out there, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and it's picking the right tools to apply to a specific problem. We've talked about in the past data scientists and not really understanding their kind of geeky level of using algorithms, just simple complicated maths, if you like, to try and address a specific problem. And it's getting them focused on specific problems and understanding how to bring different tools to get to an answer. And so it's about learning with every type of automation that you do.
Ian, obviously you work with customers across the piece, both in private sector and in public sector. If you think about your public sector customers, what kind of technical challenges are they facing, and how big or significant are those challenges that need to be overcome?
There are technical barriers, but they're not insurmountable, and things like there's many legacy systems out in the public sector that do very good jobs at what they do, but they've got their own silos of data. And if you're going to implement AI successfully and automation across these different systems, that's the problem from a technology perspective. You've got to start sharing data, and you've got to do it in a secure way and a recordable and a compliant way. So there are technological challenges, but they can be overcome. And an example was one that I just used the other day, and I was actually really impressed. My driving license expired. I'm of that age. So I had to apply for a new one. And it actually, you apply through DVLA online, but they actually take the image from the Home Office, the Passport Office, and apply it to your new driving license. And I was really impressed. So there's an example of where data is now being shared across boundaries. And that's going to be more relevant and more common throughout public sector, whether the hospitals, whether the local governments. These departments, these different organisations are going to have to start being more joined up. So I think the bigger challenge is not the technological challenge, but the political with a small p. that people are going to have to want to start working together, that they're going to have to reduce the boundaries or the barriers in their little fiefdoms and start to share and work together more to everyone's benefit.
Yeah, I think there's a challenge there, isn't there, when you start sharing data. People don't want your data shared from one place to another, even though it benefits us and saves us time in your instance. Renewing your tax disk is sharing information between different systems, and people go, I don't want them talking to them.
Absolutely. And there is obviously a legal aspect to it, which is the whole, where is data stored, when is it destroyed, how can we keep it, the whole GDPR aspect to it. That all needs to be taken into account. But from a technological perspective, sharing data, having data move down a pathway, whether it's an NHS patient pathway or, as I say, applying for a new driving licence, that is possible if there's a will.
So you talked about the importance of compliance and to a degree on the kind of ethical and legal concerns. Matthew, in the NHS, obviously, I guess you're dealing with very sensitive data, very personal citizen data. How big an obstacle is the ethics of using AI and deploying it at some kind of scale?
So I think people, if you look at summary care record implementation a few years ago, that was trusts, hospitals, GP practices sharing data to a central system, and that got wound back quite a lot because of the data sharing fears. But actually, if you're introducing systems to do the tasks that people do, you're taking people out of a problem where previously they were the only people that could do transactions across different systems. So if you can put an automation or piece of AI in to move data from one system to another, it can delete it when it's finished. It doesn't remember it, it's not a person, it won't see a relative or somebody they know down the road. So I think there's benefit, but it's helping people understand that it's not something to be frightened of. It isn't the Terminator.
So clearly, despite all these challenges and obstacles we're talking about, AI is being used, it is being deployed in the public sector. Matthew, what's your experience of how you're using it? Are we talking mostly about kind of back office, back end functions, or is it something that can actually be used, in front office, front end, citizen facing service delivery?
Yeah, I think for us at NHS SBS, it's back office processes mainly. So we're dealing with volumes of transactions, and we've got the capability to reduce the amount of time those transactions take, and in the finance world that's really important. So we have our first robot, the foreign exchange bot, was something where somebody had to go and get data off a website, put it into a system. It takes 40 minutes, they do it every day. Now we've got a bot that does that every day. It takes a few minutes. It's relieved a mundane job from what somebody was doing previously. Or where we've got hundreds of reports need producing for all the trusts that use our service. That gets done first day of the month. 42 people producing reports for 6 or 7 hours. Now our processes where the robot does it in a couple of hours, something like that. So mainly for us in the back office. I think there are examples where it's starting to be used in the front office more. Patient bookings and cancellations, for example. We have a solution that we're working on at the moment where if patients cancel bookings, it will take that empty slot and it will try and find other patients that can fill the slot, and it will contact them to make the booking into the slot. So it's saving money, and that's something that a person's interacting with, and there's no people involved in that process, whereas previously there would be a patient clerk, booking clerk somewhere looking through the cancellations, trying to work out who would take short notice bookings into slots and then making phone calls to them. So we kind of cut out some of that, but it's mainly back office for us, but we're seeing examples in the front office now.
And if we approach that question from the point of view of your customers, Ian, what kinds of things are they using AI for? Are we talking just about kind of back-end, automation, or are we seeing really more transformative stuff at the bleeding edge of kind of service delivery?
Traditionally, and the low-hanging fruit has been the back office processes, as you say, the finance, the HR, procurement. But now we're also starting to see where it's actually been used very successfully in, call it the operational or the front office side of things, and give you a couple of examples, if I may. A county council is actually deploying automation in its adult social care, and it's saving £500,000 a year, whilst improving the quality of the care as well, the quality of the provision of the services. A police service is using it to automate firearm certification, and not only is it reducing the time it takes to actually do the processing of these applications, but the error rate has reduced to zero. So these are real life examples of it being used in operational type environments.
Yeah, we're working, one of the automations we're working on at the moment is effectively pulling together a big spreadsheet for the finances across the NHS. And there's two people spend 2.5 days a month at the beginning of the month just pulling this spreadsheet together. The subsequent days, they might do that again depending on what they found the first time. Now the automation, our first recording show it does that job in half an hour. But it's releasing, they're not losing their jobs. They're now actually going to be proper analysts analysing the finances, which is what they should be doing, surely.
You know, in the context of the public sector where putting together a compelling business case is so crucial. I mean, let's not pretend that any part of the public sector doesn't have funding and budget challenges, whether it's the NHS or local authorities or central government as well. Mathieu, how have you kind of approached this need to justify the investment and kind of frame it to senior management and I guess clinicians and frontline staff as well? How do you approach kind of building out that business case?
It's a mix of many things actually, because clearly the exec, it's about financials and making sure that the bottom line is the bottom line and we need to keep the costs down. But it's also about customer service. So we have a balance in our automations of do we do something faster, more efficiently, more accurate and save money at the same time? Well, that's fantastic. We've got processes that took 5 days and now take 2.5. So where an NHS trust is making a request for us to change something financially, that can be done in a couple of hours. At the same time, there has been still some staff release as a result of that. But in some of those cases, we took on more business analysts. So they didn't necessarily lose their roles. Other people also move on naturally. So you can automate large processes, increase the quality of the process at the same time, and make savings without doing the scary lose staff type thing, which is what everybody worries about. So as long as the exec can see that you're going to increase net promoter scores, you're going to reduce the cycle time of a process and improve the quality and reduce the cost at the same time, then kind of everybody's a winner.
And what I would add is the employee net promoter score as well. If the employees, this stuff does make their life much better, much happier employees, are more productive employees, and then there are ancillary costs associated to that. But it's if they're more fulfilled and happier in their jobs, then everyone's a winner, really.
Yeah, we're big advocates of Great Place to Work. We do the survey every year and we take snapshots throughout the year as well. So we're very conscious of the impact that automations are having. And I get emailed from staff processes which are annoying, should I say, for them to do, not necessarily big time savers. So we do, we interleave some processes like that with big time savers, and that way staff they get benefit, and it's not just about cost savings.
As an external provider, Ian, how do you kind of approach working with the wider organisation? If we look at somewhere like DWP, for example, with policymakers, with senior management, with delivery people.
On the good side, everyone's heard of AI now, regardless of what their definition of it is, and automation. So that helps. But people's preconceptions are often incorrect. So the conversations are all around what are the problems you're trying to solve. Is AI even correct for what you're trying to solve? Is automation correct? Understand their business pains, if you want to put a political speak on it. Trying to help them and their business improve. That's really where the conversations have to start. But it's who you have the conversations with is really important. Already talked about executive level. You have to have executive buy-in. You have to have someone who says, I know there's a problem in this business that I think we can solve, we can improve, or whatever. But that's at one level, and you need them therefore to buy into it and to drive it from the top down. But you also need to have conversations with the people who sit at the desks, who do the processes day in, day out, who own the data or do the scanning, to explain to them, or understand from them where they're having difficulty, where they're spending their time, which they don't think they need to, and get the real nitty-gritty data and information from. And at that point, you can then start to build a picture of what the real problems are, where the processes are broken, and where we can start to add value.
I was talking to a director of finance yesterday, and he's looking to make improvements in his back office. It was actually a patient booking example. And he had a number of challenges, and he was talking about automation and it being a big scary thing. And I actually started talking about robotic process automation and saying, yeah, you've got an end-to-end process there, but we can join it together easily using the robotics. And explaining it to him like that, he recognised actually this isn't a big scary automation thing. This is a small little robot that can now talk to different parts of my process. And I think it really opened the door, and he could see how automation can happen in his back office.
And I think that's the thing. Although AI and automation is now widely used, people have different preconceptions of what it means, and we have to break it back to basic. What does it really mean? What's it going to do for their job? What's it going to do for them? What's it going to do for the company or the organisation they're working with? And that's where we have to spend a lot of time, is the educational side of things. And I will say the conversations even at that level, on different levels depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to an executive finance director or COO, you're going to have a much bigger, higher, where's your problems at? Is it in finance? How do we sort that out? Is it compliance? Is it risk analysis? But then if you're talking to an operator or a finance clerk or something like that, then it's really, how long does it take you to fill in that spreadsheet? How many frustrated do you get? How many can you do a day? How many errors do you think you make? Would it make your life easier if we could reduce that by a certain amount? It's a different type of conversation.
And I guess, the deployment doesn't just end once you've got the kit installed. To get to that point, you've built the business case, you've got through any legal, ethical concerns. But once it's actually up and running, what is the key to getting that part right, to making sure that it not only works, but that continues to work and delivers, growing benefits as, use of the technology, becomes more mature and just the way you do things? What would you, answer to that?
I think the benefits realisation piece is built into every bot. So everybody wants to know how many robots you've got, how many processes you've got, how long they take to run, how long did people take. So we start an automation off with the DigiLab a requirements gathering exercise. So we work out how many people involved in the process, how long does it take, how many times do they do it a day, a week, a month. That all goes into the automation. And then as the automation runs and it takes over from the human, it logs that as it goes. So we continually see the benefit. And sometimes you don't get 100% of the benefit up front. An automation in the first instance, because it's relying on data, might only be 50% successful. But you learn from that first automation. You see where the data that is being fed is inaccurate, or where you're using something that isn't quite giving it the right type of information because it's pulling data from different sources, and you tweak and adjust, and eventually you get up to that 80%, 90%, 100%, dependent on the automation. And it will always continue to write out what it's doing and what the benefits realisation are. And sometimes we'll automate a process, and somebody says, well, actually, can we now do the next bit and the next bit? So you get this kind of flow of different iterations where you expand the automation.
How do you kind of approach this, Ian?
That's a great point. Automation and AI isn't an installation or an implementation like the old days of putting in an Oracle or a SAP finance system. You do it once. It expands. You start with some robots, some machine learning, whatever, and then as it becomes successful and gets more pervasive throughout the organisation, people start learning about it. They start to think, well, I could use that in my department, or I can see where that can go elsewhere. So it then spreads, and it's continual evolvement and continual expansion. And at the same time, you need to bring the training and the education on at the same time as well. So you don't just educate at the start of the programme. You have to keep going. You always have to bring, as new departments, new people come involved, you have to educate them, bring them on board. And you're always looking at new areas that this type of technology can benefit. And that's going to impact new people, different people, and you want to make sure that you bring them with you all the time. Yeah. So it's an ongoing process. hopefully, it never ends because it's always going to be about improving the organisation.
Yeah, we have a core team, our Centre of Excellence, that do these automations. And what they've started to see is we start to look at new processes that people down in operations have proposed to us. And they're almost exactly the same as other automations we've already done. So you're not always doing a brand new from scratch automation. One automation has done the learning and the next one can be very similar to it. There was an example earlier on in the week where I was astonished that these two processes, I think one was in debt, one was in P2P, and they were almost identical. So you do learn from previous automations and it gets quicker and quicker and your staff get better at recognising the opportunities as well.
So you talked about kind of expanding into new processes, new customers, new areas. I guess with any kind of emerging technology, the question everyone ultimately wants to ask is, where is this all going? Where do we go from here? It's a bit of a tricky question, but just to end on, Mathieu, do you have a sense of what AI will look like for you and your organisation in, let's say 3 years' time?
So I think we only know what we know now. A few years ago, I was really quite negative about electric cars, and now Tesla have fantastic cars and Mercedes and everybody else has electric cars now. So we know that we have X number of tools now. This new robotic process automation tools are used in a new way to pull all these different tools together. So I think that tool set is going to continue to expand. All of these providers now have these app stores where there's more and more tools and more code that you can use. Your Googles and your Microsofts out there have more and more algorithms that you can use and take to apply. So I think over the next few years, it's going to be the expansion of these tools and people starting to understand how they can apply them. And that's when we'll start to get more benefit from kind of AI, as we call it. And it's not scary, it's a good thing.
Ian, how would you kind of characterise the potential of this technology and where you think it might go in the next 2 or 3 years?
The potential is huge, and it's going to become very pervasive. People may not even know that when they start to buy new laptops, that there's going to be some sort of robotics on there that's going to make their life easier. So it's going to become, almost a robot on every desktop sort of thing. So it's going to become absolutely widespread, and therefore it's going to be more readily adopted and accepted as well. Where the actual technology itself is going, I don't know. 3 years in this space is a lifetime. The developments are getting exponentially faster. What happens, there might be new technology comes out tomorrow. What it's going to look like in 3 years' time, 5 years' time is absolutely no chance. 3 years' time, really, I don't know. It's just growing such a fast rate. What I do know is the whole point of this is to make citizens, patients, employees' lives that much better. And it's all geared to that objective, and that's what it's about.
Well, that seems like a great note to end on. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Sam.
Welcome.
And thank you too for being with us, and we do hope to see you again soon on Public Technology.